Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello listeners, hello and welcome to Big Little Small Talk. My name's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, you're on 40dB and we're in that segment Big Little Small Talk where we go out and have big talks with not little people in the community, lots of times big people in the community. And today I've got a young fellow called Andrew McDonagh and he is the Regional Manager for the Clontarf Foundation for the Darling Downs region. So welcome along, Andrew, to Big Little Small Talk.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, now I met you one time. I was out at a school, I think it was Harristown High, and you had a whole lot of kids there. And your work with the Clontarf Foundation I find incredibly worthwhile and incredibly interesting. Can you tell me about how you started to work for the Clontarf Foundation? Start off by telling me what is the Clontarf Foundation?
Yeah, sure. And it's a long story, and you've got to package it up a little bit so people can, digest it, and you often don't have enough time to tell the whole story. But it started back in 1999 in Perth. Our CEO now, and was then, he was coaching the Fremantle Dockers. He was their inaugural coach, and he got the sack after about 3 years because they weren't going that well. And he's a teacher, and he went back to Clontarf Aboriginal College, and that's where the word Clontarf comes from, because he had a connection there with the Christian Brothers, and he went back to try and get that school back on its feet. And I think also to try and run a bit of a footy program. He still had his footy hat on and was probably going to get some boys from all over Western Australia, maybe get them drafted into the AFL. As he got more entrenched in that and involved, he realised that education was probably his calling, and that's where the boys needed to be. However, across Western Australia, there was a lot of boys that just weren't going to school. So footy was part of it, but in the end, footy just became a vehicle to get the boys to school, because what he believed, and what we all still believe 20 years later, that education is the key to be able to live a productive, healthy life. And we know that when we look at the Closing the Gap report and statistics that don't tell personal stories, but if you finish year 12, your life outcomes are much better. And the gap in terms of life expectancy, health issues, all of those things, we believe are driven by, at the local level, boys that maybe are dropping out at year 9, year 10 and don't have the skills to go on and participate in those, in a great life, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'll just read this out to you because this is on the website. The Clontarf Foundation exists to improve the education, discipline, life skills, self-esteem and employment prospects of young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men, and by doing so equips them to participate more meaningfully in society. So is the Clontarf Foundation primarily for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander boys?
Yeah, only is, yeah. We think the program would probably work, with other cohorts or any young men. But right from the start, I think it was really clear who we wanted to be. We know that it works in that space, and we've stuck to our guns on that. Every year, every forum I do, I get asked, what about the girls? Are you going to do the girls? What about Pacific Islanders or other cohorts? And maybe in the future, but right now we know that we've got great relationships with communities, governments and federal government and state government want us working in this space, so that's us for now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do kids get involved?
So it's pretty simple. There's a lot of work that goes behind setting up a program at a high school, but we set up what's called an academy at a high school, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander boy that's enrolled at that school can voluntarily be a part of it. And so it's pretty simple from the families and the student end. There's a bit of work that goes in the background, but we're in about 120 schools across Australia, so we service the boys that are in those schools. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been one of the genius strokes, whether it was designed or just happened, but because our program is inside the school gate where the boys are supposed to be, I think that's why it works really well, because you can attract them into school, make school attractive, and help them keep coming back every day, every week, every year. Mm-hmm.
Andrew, you say you set up an academy. What does that mean? Is it a physical space? Is it a club? What is it?
Yeah, and so it's a really good question. So at a school we do have a room. The school will provide us with a room, and then we staff that room at a ratio of 1 to 25 with mentors that are in the school every school day. So the physical room is important to us, but it's really about what happens in the room, the mentoring, the role modelling, the opportunities that are offered for the boys to engage in activities, and all those activities that we do are designed to help the boys learn life skills. So you talk about, what can you see, feel and touch about the program. It is the room. There's a table tennis table in there, there's a kitchen, there's all of those things, but the magic happens between the mentors and the students, because that's where the real behaviour change occurs. So that's what it looks like. It is hard to explain. Often I always say you've got to come and have a look and come down to footy training or be around the boys or see us on a camp, and then people really understand what happens. But that's the best way to explain it.
Yeah. So does that mean that these kids will come there at lunchtime and have their lunch in there, come there before school? Like, are you providing food? Are you providing extra lessons? Tell me a bit about that.
Yes, the room's open all day, school day. We want the boys in the classroom, so there's a few structures you put around that. If a boy wants to come down during the school day, he might need a note from the teacher. But the idea is that it's always an open door, especially before school, so the boys can come in, get themselves ready for the school day. Maybe at the end of the school day there'll be an after school activity, they can come and check in with the mentors there. Some boys come in, especially year 7 and 8, when they're getting comfortable with high school, and that transition time is really difficult for some boys. They'll be in there a lot, year 7 and 8, in there every lunchtime, every recess. There is food there, there's games, the table tennis, and just that camaraderie. You've got to have a healthy traffic through the room, and I really like seeing the boys in there. I do think by the time they're in year 12, you do want the boys out in the playground with everyone else. Perhaps they've got a girlfriend, they're using the tuck shop, all of that. I think that's important. You wouldn't want to see the boys in the room all the time for the whole 6 years, but definitely always open and they can visit it. I think that point you made about is there extra classes. We do some life skill classes, but what we try and do is keep the boys in the mainstream curriculum and in their timetable. It's not like an annex program. I think that's important, that we want them in the mainstream maths, mainstream English, in school with everyone else.
And you said before that you're working within the school. So here in the Toowoomba region, how many Clontarf Foundations are we talking?
So in Toowoomba, we've got 3. So we're at the at Toowoomba State High School, Wilsonton State High School and Harristown State High School. Centenary maybe in the future. And across the Darling Downs and South Burnett. So we're in Cherbourg and Mergen, Kingaroy, Dalby, Warwick and Gundawindi. So there's about 600 boys in the program across those schools, and we probably have about 30 staff that are working with those boys across those 9 schools. Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you before, when you said about the boys, do they just have to identify as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander? How does that work?
Yeah, so when a family enrol at a school, they will identify on the school roll if they're Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and the schools have those lists. So that is, we will get the list off to school. We might approach the boys. It is voluntary, as we've said, and that's really important. There's stories where students or families haven't identified previously for whatever reason, but then they might see our program, see that the boys could be comfortable there, and then they will go and identify on the school roll. So there's some pretty cool stories around that. But yeah, it's usually the boys will come to us, and we have a lot of local Aboriginal staff that work with us, and they know the families and know the boys' stories as well. Yeah.
And you said before about education, and I would imagine it's probably, and the importance of finishing year 12, it's not just setting these kids up to try and get them to university. I wouldn't imagine it would be pathways for going to TAFE and doing apprenticeships and that sort of thing, is it? Absolutely.
We'll celebrate any pathway that the boy chooses. I think it's them finding their way. We go back to those footy days, like I think we're trying to get some boys, and a lot of the early boys were drafted and they played AFL. At the moment, Selwyn Cobbo was in our program up at Mergen State High School, a great young man. He would have made year 12 without us and with his family, but the staff up there were an extra wraparound support. So he's playing for the Broncos, which is a great story. However, not all our boys are going to go play NRL or AFL. So we will celebrate the boys that are heading off to TAFE, to university. Some have got plumbing apprenticeships, other trades. Some are going to the mines. Some are taking an extra couple of years after school to find out what they're doing, which is normal. That was me when I was a young fella as well. And we've got some staff that work with the boys once they leave school.
Oh, I was going to ask you about that too. Just tell me a little bit more about that. So, they have this wonderful closeted, or in a way, warmth of being at high school and really mentored and looked after. And what happens when they leave?
Yeah, and I think because as I say, we're 20 years old, we've learnt along the way. And in the last decade, we've probably realised that is the most important step in the whole journey. If we don't make that transition after year 12, we're not living true to our mission statement. So, there's a lot of resources that are put around the boys once they leave, especially in that first year. But, once a Clontarf boy, always a Clontarf boy, we say that. We have young men coming back to us when they're 22, wanting a change or needing some help with whatever that is. So we say that our support is always there for them. That's a really important part of it, that you're after.
Tell me actually how that works. Like, is there staff that then follow up with the boys and check in and give them a call? And
so in this region, we've got 2 employment officers. So they aren't academy based. So one of them lives here in this office, and I've got another one up in the South Burnett, and they get to know the boys throughout their schooling journey, and so there's already that relationship there. And then they will contact the boys afterwards. They'll have the boys in for a dinner or a touch game of footy, so you've still got that fun engagement. But those engagement activities are designed just to check in with them, see how they're travelling. Look, the foundation is funded a third privately, and the reason I move over to that is because a lot of those organisations that fund us will offer opportunities for the boys, and so there's some really great pathways that are provided, and so we're really tapped in, especially with those boys that take one of those pathways as well. We spoke about the strength of the relationship. You've got to keep that really strong, so after school they're willing to reach out and say good day. The challenge is with the young guys is that we'd ring them or text them, you wouldn't get much back, so you either got to get on Facebook or social media, and then you're connected with them.
So your social media skills are pretty good. You're pretty good on the TikTok, are you?
Not so much me, but the staff are,
Some young person is quite good with that. I want to go back to how the foundation is funded in a minute, but before we go off, I did read that Clontarf means meadow of the bull in Irish, and I thought in a name like Andrew McDonagh you would have some Irish in you. Is that correct?
I do, and it is interesting that there's a lot of mix that actually work as in MC in their last name. But the Clontarf was just, if people say, where did Clontarf come from? And when I first came to Queensland to start the program, I'd say, I'm Andrew, I'm from Clontarf. And they would think that I'm from down there.
Redders.
That's right. And I didn't know there was a place called Clontarf, so that was quite confusing. There's not much connection other than it was the Clontarf program. My personal story there is interesting because in the 70s, and this was not by design, I have an uncle, my mum's brother, who was a Christian brother, who actually worked at the Clontarf Aboriginal College. It was funny how all that circled background is not why I ended up there. I worked in the Kimberley for the Clontarf first, but it was just interesting how that circle came back round. And I only bring that up because I think those values that were at the Clontarf College and the Christian Brothers values, I think are really pertinent and still run through the foundation and the guys that work for us.
Right. So there's that element, but a really critical part of the program is the sport, isn't it?
Yep.
Is it just AFL, or is it any sport, anywhere? Or
any sport, anywhere that will engage the boys. So it's really AFL in Western Australia, Northern Territory, Victoria and South Australia. New South Wales and Queensland, we use the game that the mob play, and that's rugby league. It's so strong. If I bring a Sharon over here, the boys run the other way. So the boys love that game. I think Indigenous people on the East Coast have had a strong connection with that game for a long time, and it just works. You use that football, and it's not about, as I said, it's not about trying to make NRL players. What you can do, and I'm a phys ed teacher, that was my early career, but what you can do in terms of teaching values through sport and life skills and discipline, I think using sport as a vehicle with young men is so powerful. Yeah.
Is it a lot to do with the sort of the physical and therefore the mental health of sport, which is so fantastic, but also part of being a team and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And we train in the mornings, and often I get either from staff or people looking in saying, "Oh, you should train in the afternoon. You get a lot more boys there." But the whole idea of training in the morning is getting into that routine. So we're getting up, getting ready for school, feeling good for the school day. So there's a reason behind that. But that's right, that camaraderie that you can have. You get the boys on a bus from Harristown going down to play the boys from Gunn to Windy. There's so much in that, camping out in Swags the night before the carnival. The footy's just the side thing. It's all those relationships and fun times that are built throughout that experience that really help us, support the boys. Yeah,
it's terrific. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 40DB. We're in Big Little Small Talk, and today we're talking to Andrew McDonagh, who is the Regional Manager for the Darling Downs area of the Clontarf Foundation. And Andrew's been telling me about where experience has come from to be working at the Clontarf Foundation and the importance of the sport. I also wanted to ask you, Andrew, about cultural things that you do with the boys. How much of that is involved?
Yeah.
Discovering or exploring their heritage and their Indigenous culture and
Yeah, it's so important. We don't say that we are a cultural program. We have a whole variety of people that work for us, and it'd be inappropriate to do that. However, we understand it's really important, and often our staff in the academy will facilitate those experiences. We do have some Aboriginal staff that will take the boys back to their country and where they're from and do some activities with them there and engage in culture. But usually it looks like us facilitating that, whether it's with elders or if the boys head up to Darwin to visit some of Clontarf academies up there, they'll get some really rich cultural experiences there. I think in Toowoomba we probably do need to, really keep focusing on a lot of the boys and the families. Traditionally, I'm not from here, but what I've learnt in my time is that are from out west. And so, you can do the Gold Coast trip and take them to the footy and go to Dreamworld, but it's really important we do the other side where they go west and learn that way as well. A lot of the literature and research shows that if First Nations young people understand their identity, they are strong, and that helps them at school and in life. So, it's really important.
The pride of being Indigenous, I always say that until the Indigenous people are revered in this country, we're probably starting behind the 8 block, I think. I'd like people to say, oh, wow, you're Indigenous, and sort of be that to me, to be held up as sort of something really special and to be revered. Now, we talk about sport, and you said that you're a phys ed teacher by trade.
Yep.
By trade, and AFL's your sport?
Yeah, yep, that's right.
So where did you grow up, Andrew? You said you didn't grow up in Brisbane?
No.
In Toowoomba, rather?
No, so I'm from Victoria, from Gippsland, which is Aussie Rules heartland. Lots of good players come out of there, but there's really strong country footy leagues. You'll have a town there that's got a railway, a pub and a general store, and it'll have a footy team, a first, a second, a thirds and a fourth. It's amazing. And that was a little town that I was from, a little place called Narnagoon, and you would, just listening to it, you wouldn't think it has a footy team. It has a really strong history that, a club that's been going for 150 years.
It's the Narnagoons, what?
That actually is just the Narnagoon Gooners.
Narnagooners.
No, it's only one of the clubs that doesn't have like a mascot or an animal or anything. Yeah.
So you spent your whole primary and high school there? Mum and Dad still there?
Yeah, Mum and Dad are still there. I went to school a bit closer to Melbourne because it's sort of bush then, although the suburban sprawl's getting out there. So an hour on the bus to school in towards, but just that small community, country community, that I like living in Toowoomba and working in the Darling Downs because it does remind me of that Gippsland of small towns, community-minded people, and that are really focused on their neighbours and and other people around them.
So what were Mum and Dad doing in Narnagoon?
So Dad,
am I saying it correctly?
Yeah, Narrgoon. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Mum, actually, interesting story. So I'm one of 5 and the youngest. So my parents were a bit older when they had me, I suppose, by the time they got to me. Mum was actually a chemist, and she was born in the 50s. So
when you say a chemist, are you saying pharmacist or a chemist?
Chemist. So she worked for Kodak. But I think the story there is interesting because a young woman in the 50s going to university doing a science degree was, she speaks about that was hard. She was the only female in her course. And then went out into the working world. And I think that story is pretty unique from that time. It's a pretty smart lady, very smart lady. But then the way of those times start to have kids, so she used to stay at home, and she didn't really go back to that, which I don't know whether she regrets it. I don't think so, but I do wonder what that would have been like if she had continued on her career. And so that's her story. And Dad came out from Ireland when he was 18 with probably pretty much nothing, and I think he's even a bit older again, so that would have been interesting times in the late 30s and 40s in Ireland. So he came out here and settled and probably just did odd jobs, like never had a trade but was building, worked for the council. And so that's what I remember. But then he retired when I was still in my teens, so it was interesting. When you're young, you don't really observe the working life. Yeah.
And so he had directly come from Ireland, so you were first generation immigrants, really?
Yep.
And he'd met your mother. What's the story of him meeting your mother, do you know?
Being from Ireland, staunch Catholic, I think so Mum was brought up in Kew, which is in Melbourne. I think Dad was around there as well. So they'd have things like Catholic walking groups, and everything they seem to talk about they used to do has Catholic at the start of it. So I think it was just in those type of groups in that environment where they met. Yeah.
When you say they were a bit older, what are we talking like? Were you conscious of your parents being older when you were at high school, say?
Probably when I started to get to high school. Dad and Mum, they're pretty fit though. So Dad would have been almost 50 when he had me, and I reckon Mum was 42, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
That might have been to marriage encounter, like a lot of Catholic families.
Yeah.
So was there a big gap between the other 4 and you, or were you
my
all
eldest
pretty
sister
boom?
is 10 years older than me, and then the next 2 came pretty quick, bit of a gap, and then my next sister up from me is 3 years older than me. So so a bit of an even spread. Yeah.
And was it a priority in your family that you all went to university? Were you all? Where did you go to university then?
I went to Deakin Burwood and then to Australian Catholic Uni. Sounds like I'm really Catholic here, isn't it? But it's but of course. We all did go to university, but it's interesting, isn't it? I don't know it was ever an expectation put on us, but maybe it was in a subtle way. We did all end up there and doing different things. So it's interesting. And I think with the work that I do with the Clontarf Foundation, I do wonder, how did I end up at university? How did I have that privilege of getting that strong education? And sometimes I wonder about the gap in Australia and what we need to do to close that. Everyone should have the opportunity to go there.
For sure, going back to the closing the gap statistics are shocking, and they're going further backwards. Do you remember very many Indigenous kids in Narrgoon?
Yeah, we do. So that area there, it does have not as say like a stronger community where like a Cherbourg or even in Toowoomba, I find there's a really strong community and the mob know each other and know the families, which I really love. But definitely played footy with a lot of Aboriginal kids. Not so much when I got to high school, not so much because I was further in towards Melbourne. But in those times, though, we did know they're Aboriginal, and I've got lots of friends that are, but that wasn't the identifying thing. They were just good friends, good teammates, good families. Yeah, I really enjoyed my time with them. When you finished
university, was that when you went up into the Northern Territory, or how did you end up there?
No, so I finished university, taught for a couple of years, back at the high school that I went to, actually.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and not sure whether it was good. It was great fun, and it actually was. It was good, but I do wonder, was that the right thing to do?
Did you struggle calling Mr. Smith instead of Dave?
Yeah, it was all of that. There was a lot of teachers that were still there, but it was great. It was really good fun. Did that for a couple of years and then probably realised I needed to get out of that environment and grow a bit. So I went overseas for about 3 years. I just packed the surfboard and went over to South America for almost a year. Just tripped around and taught English where I could, did a bit of surf coaching at some places in Central America. So that was just that, wanting to break out of growing up in Narnagoon, going out and see the big wide world. Then went up to North America, did some ski seasons in Banff, which was just amazing, and was just on that journey as a young man in his 20s yet. And yeah, it's not that unique a story, because the next I ended up in London, which you all do, and did some teaching in London, which was great, really great experience. So, I think that was really important in those formative years for me to do that, growing up in such a small town, going back to the high school and teaching where I went to school.
How far is Narnagoon from the surf, can I ask?
Well, it's probably about 40 minutes on the back roads. Yeah, we used to belt our old HR down through a few farm roads and get out the back. So Phillip Island is near Narnagoon, and we spent a lot of our youth down there. Any ride you could get to the surf, the older boys that were going for the footy club, you'd be in with your board. And then when I came back from overseas, we moved to Phillip Island. Yeah, I came back with Laura, who is now my wife, and her parents are living on Phillip Island, and we moved straight back there after school, after travelling. Yeah.
Okay, so you'd met your wife, an Australian girl, an Aussie girl from Phillip Island. Where did you meet?
No, so we had spent some time together at high school, and then we went off and did our own thing, and she travelled as well. She's really well travelled. And then, met in London, actually, in the UK again, and thought, this is meant to be, this is us.
That's a great story. I love that. Yeah. Now, you talk about Laura, because I know Laura from a different area of my life, and she does some interesting work too. Tell me about... I still haven't found out how you ended up in the Northern Territory, but anyway, we'll just jump over to Laura, and you'll forgive me for jumping around a bit. Yeah. So what type of work does she do?
So she works with Transition Services, which is an EQ unit, Education Queensland unit, that is really based in Cairns, and they wrap an extra support around the students from mainly the Cape that are coming to boarding school. So they might be from communities where their school only goes to grade 6 or year 10, or families want to make that choice that they want to send their kids to boarding school. So that's really challenging, as we all know. It's a long way from home, and so that extra layer of support is really important. And of course, some of the Toowoomba schools are great. They're really accepting and welcoming and really want that work. And there's quite a lot of, Laura will know the exact number, but there's quite a lot of students from the Cape that are boarding in Toowoomba. And so Laura wraps around those students, helps with travel, helps with family connections, helps with the schools as well. So that's her work at the moment. She did work at Fairholme College and worked with a group of girls that were there from the Cape as well, and then from there she's probably stepped over to this role that's working across a number of schools. Yeah.
So you clearly don't have any Indigenous heritage, does Laura?
No, she doesn't. No, she doesn't.
So why have you both ended up in this line of work, do you think?
I actually didn't grow up in Narnagoon. I grew up in a little town
outside
Narnagoon.
That was the big smoke, was it? Right, okay.
But where I grew up...
What was it called?
Maryknoll, it's called, and it's got a whole another story to it. It's a really interesting story. But
tell me that story. Yeah, no, tell me. We don't mind. We're on a meandering journey.
Okay, all right. You're going to have to edit this one. So Maryknoll is a interesting place, and it goes back to Catholic at the start of everything my family says, that a priest in the 50s bought 100 square acres and divided it into 2.5 acre blocks, not all of it, and it was designed, built a church in the middle, and it was designed that it was going to be a self-sustainable community. So I think it was in that 50s and 60s time, post-World War II, people are looking at different ways of living.
Wasn't it cold?
Well, it sounds like, it depends who you ask. It really sounds like that, doesn't it? And so families moved out from Melbourne and the suburbs, set up, beautiful place environmentally and to look at. So lots of Catholic families moved out there, young Catholic families, had a lot of kids. And, there'd be 5, 6, it would be the minimum, 8, 9, 10 kids. So we grew up in this environment where we knew every family around that hill. There's 5 to 10 kids in every family. And you drive past everyone's house, everyone's car. And so it's like this small community. The actual philosophy of it fell apart in them. I think it was self-sustainable for a while. They had a cordial factory, but it was all about you didn't go off the hill to work. Your kids went to school there as well. They had a school there that was had nuns, and the brothers ran it, and my older 3 siblings went to that to start with. I think one of the telling points when I say not fell apart, but the philosophy my parents talk about, they sent the 3 kids down to Nanagoon, which is not that far away, but in that environment, it's a long way away. And then, so the relationship with the community was start to be fractured. So you say, was it a cult? Well, but then others started to do that as well. People had to drive to Dandenong for work. General Motors Holden was there, and I suppose nice ideal way of living, and if that community would work, that would be good, but I think we know from history that would never last.
So your parents were ones who had moved, say, from Melbourne to go out there to go to the Merry-Knoll community?
Yeah, they weren't first. They probably were a little bit, I think they're about 5 or 6 years after it actually started, so they probably aren't classed as founding families, although they're still there. And it's really interesting, no power. The wood chip,
sewage, no water,
no
town water.
Yeah. So all the families just went out there and started their families. Cold in Gippsland.
Yes. And your parents are still living there?
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
in the original house that
Yeah. And so and they are the last of that original group that were out there. Yeah, because they were a bit younger too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's actually the history that is fascinating.
Story, yeah.
So how do we draw that back to why did we end up working in Indigenous education? So the family over the fence from me, we're an Aboriginal family. Their grandmother was stolen, part of the stolen generation, a really sad story out of Hermansburg in Alice Springs. And going back to it saying, I just hung out with these guys, they looked after me. There was 4 really strong boys, twins among them, and a sister, and she's like my sister, so same age. But those boys looked after me, got me down to footy training, and still do. So I had an amazing connection with them. But I think that community life that I spoke of on the hill, I see some similarities. It is not the same, but I see some similarities the way that mob look after each other. They know each other really well. They know the intricacies of families, and I feel that's how I grew up. And I think maybe that's why I gravitate towards that, and the way that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people really look after each other and look after their families. I think I've only been reflecting on this lately. It's probably pretty consistent with the way and the values that I grew up with. Yeah,
that's a great story. I love hearing that. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 4DB, and we're in our Big Little Small Talk segment, and we're talking to Andrew McDonagh, who has got a fascinating story to tell about how he's come to work in Toowoomba for the Clontarf Foundation, which is a group that mentors and encourages and gives life skills and self-esteem to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander boys and men in our community. And you were mentioning about going up to the NT and working up there. So how did that happen?
Yeah, so we got to that point where I moved back to Phillip Island after being overseas and taught off the island for a little while, and then landed a job. There's a great school on Phillip Island, New Haven College, and it was pretty small then, so that's in about 2005. And so I'm living the dream. I've got a young family. The school's about 2k from me. Could run along the beach to school. We had a surfing academy where we'd take the boys and girls surfing, teaching phys ed, working in this little community on Phillip Island. so fantastic. Did that for about 7 years, and then we probably realised, we thought, probably, you know, when you're young, you still got that travelling itch a little bit. You'd been travelling overseas for 3 years, now you're back in that community going, is this us forever? So we just thought, well, let's do something a little bit different. Let's take the kids.
How many kids did we have
3
at
that
this
stage.
Right?
Youngest, Hamish was, he would be going into, he would have been 6, and Lou was about 2. So I had a friend that that taught in Cunnamulla, which is just over the NT border. So it's actually not the NT, it's actually in WA. And he told me about this place, and he was working for the Clontarf Foundation in Victoria. So he connected me with the foundation. There was an opening in Cunnamulla, so I went up and ran that program there. And it was just to have I think I remember telling him, I think I got a year's leave from New Haven, and I probably told them that I was going to go there for 2 years, to Clontarf, but I knew I'd be back. But it's really interesting. Once we got up there, we just really loved what we did, and we felt in education, if you're there to make a difference, that's the place that we thought we could really make a difference. So we stayed in Cunnamulla for 3 years, running the Clontarf program, and Laura was working with another program called Follow the Dream, which is another mentoring program that's based at the school as well. We just sort of,
Life would be pretty good in Cunnamulla. It's on the bucket list. I'd love to go to Cunnamulla.
Yeah.
And you're exploring all the Kimberleys in your weekends and your time off with the kids, and life is pretty good.
Yeah. And that's how you end up staying there. We love what we're doing, but every holiday is like, oh, you haven't been here yet, so you come back for another year, and you come back for another year. We could have gone back for another year as well. I think schooling your own kids up there, it's a big call. Like, they'd probably end up boarding in Perth. Not always, but that's probably what you'd end up doing. That's a big call, it's a long way. So and Clontarf were coming to Queensland, and they asked me to come over and get this started in Toowoomba. So there's a great opportunity career-wise there, and we'll probably then, drifting away from the Kimberley, and that's how we ended up in Toowoomba, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how long ago was that?
2015 we arrived, Laura and I, yeah.
So we might have you for a little while. Yeah, that's probably the longest you've been anywhere for a while, is it?
For a while it is, yeah.
The kids are all at school. So did you have another child after the third one?
No, 3.
Okay.
Three was us. I think if we had stayed in Phillip Island, we probably would have maybe had another one.
Mary's Knoll.
I was just about to say.
I
was trying to think of a joke there. If we had another 10.
You couldn't quite think of something that was. Now, just before I go off the sport, you still play sport yourself, and you got a coaching award, I think. Was that not that long ago? You got the AFL Young Person's Coach of the Year?
I haven't played much myself. We had a masters thing happening where it was over 35s, which was good fun. But my eldest, Hamish, he's been playing Aussie rules since he arrived in the Kimberley, of course, that's what you do. So I was involved with South Toowoomba Bombers, and I coached a lot of those junior sides there, and I love that. I really love that. In my role here, I don't have as much to do with the boys in the academies as I would have if you're running an academy. I still like being around young people, and still like in that sporting environment, so I really like coaching. So still, Aussie Rules has a presence in Toowoomba and the Darling Downs, and it's growing too. So that's my sport, so that's where I feel I can.
Do your kids play Aussie Rules?
Hamish does. The girls Toowoomba's got them, so it's touch, football, netball, yeah.
Great, yeah. Both great games, of course.
Yes, yeah.
Now, I know that I just want to hear, it does sound very idyllic, the work that you're doing, but I'm sure you probably have some not so great stories to tell as well. Can you think of sort of a time where you've been surprised, where it's fallen down, or you've not lost it, but you lost a kid for whatever reason? Is there a few of those stories? Yeah,
there are. From the Kimberley, and over this way as well, but from the Kimberley, when I said you're working in the school, you get very connected with the families and the boys and your staff. Sadly, this is not a unique story, but I had a young boy that we were working with in Cunnamulla that committed suicide. He would have been in year 10. It's sad there. Everyone goes away. The wet comes, school finishes, people go away back to home to visit family, those boys are still there, and then without that support, I suppose. And so one Christmas we went back to Phillip Island and came back, and I'd learned about it over the summer. And, I always wonder if we were still there during Christmas, maybe a phone call might have been made. So they're really sad and trying times. But I think also it galvanised you a little bit to say and to really reinforce the work that you're doing, how important it is and how much of a difference it can make. It can be really critical sometimes.
And tell me about a really fantastic story where you just unexpected something happened, or just a fantastic story.
Yeah, look,
I know you'd have lots of fantastic stories with your work that you're doing.
The thing I love is at the end of every year, and Megan, I think you've been to some, if not one of those, our awards nights at the end of the year. The Year 12 boys get up and we celebrate them finishing. Sometimes they are the first boy in their family to finish Year 12. We know the stories behind, the challenges that it's taken to get them there. And the schools are great as well. The schools will circle around and support them, and, obtaining that QCE is, the big thing, and schools will bend over backwards often to make sure that the student gets every opportunity to get there. But seeing some of those fellas stand up on stage at the end with their Year 12 certificate is just really uplifting. And it's great timing because it's often at the end of a really busy, tough year, and then it just gets you fired up for the following year. Yeah.
I want to just ask you another quick question before we start to wrap it up, but it's about kids who aren't sporty. So the arty kid, or the kid who loves to read, or the kid who loves to be in a play. How do you accommodate those? Yeah,
and look, the program's evolved. So, like I spoke before, there's 600 boys across the Darling Downs. There's about 2,500 across Queensland, and there's 10,000 boys in the program in Australia. So the reason I say that is because not every one of those boys are into footy. So as we've evolved and got larger, we have had to facilitate a whole range of different activities, and it's up to the staff to really get to know those boys. And I suppose that 1 to 25 ratio that I spoke about is really important, because you can get to know 25 boys that school year really well. So whatever it is, we've got to find it for that individual.
That's up to the staff to try and
okay. If we were just a footy program, I think we'd miss a lot of boys along the way. You're right.
And you touched on it very briefly, and you said, people are always asking you, why aren't you doing it for this, why aren't you doing it for that? But I have to ask, what are you doing for the girls? Not you, but what is happening for girls?
So there are programs. Beyond Broncos got a program and a presence in Toowoomba. There are other programs around Australia as well. The role models, Ricky Grace had, he was a basketball that came out to Perth, and he had one started called Role Models. The Stars is another one. I think, fortunately or unfortunately, the way it is, there's a number of girls' programs, and I'm not sure if everyone we wouldn't know the ones in Townsville, because Clontarf's national. I think we have that presence. But what I do like is, we come in, do a presentation to a school, consult with community, and then we get our program going, and then everyone goes, what about the girls? And whilst it can be challenging to answer those questions, it's good, because then people start pushing for a program for the girls. So in my experience of opening programs, what happens is we'll come in, we'll start one, and then a few years later, there'll be a girls program next to it. Not always, and there should be, but I think even if we pave the way, it sort of creates that void for everyone to start asking the question.
But there's not a national body like the Clontarf Foundation doing a similar sort of thing for girls?
No. But there's good work being done in that space, just because it's not national. Like, I know there's some really great people and some great programs that are doing some good stuff.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I do like to ask some questions that aren't totally related to your work and to your personal life, but you've been so generous with your stories, which has been fantastic. But, on a similar sort of a vein, do you know anyone, Andrew, can you think of anyone, because I would imagine a lot of people would be sort of looking to you as a mentor, but do you know anyone who's kind of living their life to the fullest?
That family I spoke of that I grew up with on the other side of the fence, we're all scattered now, but those guys are just unbelievable what they've achieved in their life. One of those boys is over in the UK. He runs a big tech company. MyZone it's called. And I remember him working on this 15 years ago. We're all having probably a bit of a chuckle. He just stuck to his guns, and it's going really well now. And you gave me this question just before, but it is an interesting question, I think, because I don't want to get too philosophical about it. But
Get philosophical, mate. I like philosophical.
But, when we say to the fullest, I think with social media, we look at Instagram, we look at what other people are doing, and you can see, aren't they living a great life? You take the photo of when you're having the best fun, don't you? And you load it.
Yeah.
But, what is a full life? Is it just getting up in the morning, being really busy and packing everything in? And I suppose when you asked that question, I did land back with Laura, my wife. She's up in the morning to gym, off to work, 3 kids, a busy family life. But I think there's that, but there's also, I think, living a full life I'm not saying that I'm good at this, I'm actually really bad at this, but being able to stop and enjoy the moment that you're in and seeing the good in that moment, I think that's how you live a full life.
Of course.
And I'm probably saying that because I know that's a deficit of mine at the moment, but so being able to smell the roses and being here and now, that's full, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. And, I don't want to make a Catholic joke about how many decades of the rosary you used to do when you were younger, but I mean, in a way, that's a form of contemplation or meditation, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
That stopping, and even being in Mass, it's just you have to sit still, and just
absolutely.
sit still with your thoughts for a while. So,
I agree.
All right. Now, we talk about Laura being a great girl. What about a blind date? You've ever been on a blind date?
No, I haven't.
Oh, that's a hard no, I'd say, folks. Yeah. What about the weirdest food combination that you've ever tried?
In South America, I saw lots of different delicacies getting consumed. In Vietnam, off the streets, the street stalls, pigeon was on the go there. So that was really interesting. One of the other ones I was thinking about was when I've been in Arnhem Land and Yirrkala, and they, turtle is a very traditional food and a very, sacred food for them. But what they will do with that and eat every part of it and consume and have a dish for every part of the turtle is quite amazing to watch, actually. And that was really interesting. So not just the meat, but
beautiful.
A lot of it.
Yeah. All right, now our listeners will know that I'm a real royalist, and yesterday was the Queen's 86th birthday, I think, and she's been 70 years on the throne.
Yeah.
Royals, you into the royals? Thumbs up, thumbs down? You got a favourite royal?
Having Dad an Irish father, I suppose, not so much was a big thing. Not so much. I did meet Lady Di. She came out to Gippsland just in a crowd, So, and I do, when reflecting now, I was too young there, but you reflect now about what she was about, I think her story is pretty amazing. But I'm interested with, not that I follow it, but just with Harry and Meghan, where all that's going, distancing himself, the Invictus Games, which has been on. I think that work that Harry does is amazing. Whether it's a favourite or not, but I'd be interested to see how the contemporary royal life sort of plays out over the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Well, in your usual way, it's not a flippant answer, is it? It's a well thought out and very measured, which is lovely. Okay, my last question for you: do you have a song that can't keep you off the dance floor? Dancing Man?
No, I think. I'll keep this quick because I just love Paul Kelly, and the reason I saw him at the Empire here late last year, wasn't it? And just amazing. And I think for me, he was always been played on the record player at home. He's just spanned across so many decades and still telling great stories. And I think the story of the song lines and his lyrics are great. But I think you connect them to your parts of your life, whether when you're growing up or when you're in London or, whatever part. And I think a lot of people that are big fans do that. They connect his songs with different parts of their life. So I really, his music and his work has always been entwined with, wherever we've been, our journey. Yeah.
So on that, going full circle, what's the tagline for the foundation?
Tagline as in...
From
Little Things Big Things Grow. Yeah, that's right. And I think, really great. And interestingly, so Kev Carmody, amazing. So Mick Carmody and Dan Carmody, his sons work for us here in Toowoomba, and Paul Carmody does some great work out at Amaroo. Look, that's not why we hired him or how it came to fruition, but it is funny how it comes full circle, isn't it? And Mick was just telling me a great story. He went down to the Blues Fest on the weekend and watched his dad play down there. Kev played down there for the first time for a while, I think. What a magic moment it would have been, you know. Yeah.
But also Paul Kelly plays from Little Things
Yeah,
Big
of course.
Things Grow too.
With Kev,
so,
yeah.
That's a perfect way to finish the interview. Thank you for being so generous with your time and telling me your story. It's just wonderful to hear the work that you're doing at the Clontarf Foundation, Andrew.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks. Thank you.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.